And now, The Money Show
with Stephen Grootes on 702.
Let's walk the talk.
The Money Show with Stephen Grootes is brought to you by ABSA CIB, powering Africa's potential from ground to grid. Proud sponsor of the Africa Energy Forum 2025. Good evening. Welcome to the program. It is, of course, a public holiday. The JSE closed today. Is a moment sometimes I think these public holidays sort of come along in a useful time because they give us a chance to kind of consider things and get away from the sort of rush. We can actually spend a bit more time looking more deeply into some things that do need to be looked into more deeply. And I've been very intrigued by sort of one or two things that have happened over the last couple of days. You may remember a conversation we had last week about Starlink. We've had several conversations about Starlink of late. And I suggested that I wondered if we might see some political action around it. And I was reminded of that today because Julius Malema was speaking in Umlazi. He was giving the Youth Day address for the EFF. He is, of course, leader of the Economic Freedom Fighters. And he made a series of comments about Starlink. He said Elon Musk, he said he's not scared of Donald Trump or Elon Musk. And I think we know Julius Malema well enough to know that that is absolutely true, speaking the truth there. But he also said he would never let Elon Musk have Starlink in South Africa as long as he was breaking the law. And I was just interested in, there are a couple of political things going on here. I think it's useful for all politicians to have an enemy. And in South Africa's political milieu, in our context, what better enemy to have than Donald Trump and perhaps Elon Musk. And in the same way that, in my view, I think Trump sometimes uses South Africa for various reasons. So Malema is perfectly entitled to do the same. But I was interested in whether or not we're going to start to see the whole issue of whether the BEE equity regulations that are being sort of relaxed around Starlink, the instructions or the process that's been started by the Minister, Solly Malatsi, may actually become a little bit more complicated than we first thought. And that, in fact, we might just find ourselves in a position where this gets almost hopelessly politicized, court cases, the whole bit. You can just imagine, and things drag on and drag on. It may require a little bit of deft management by someone somewhere, if they're determined to let that happen, to make sure that it doesn't. But I just think there is scope for someone like Malema and others, I must just say, to actually say, well, no, we'll go to court, we'll do this, we'll do that. Might be cheered on. I saw in Parliament last week, some of these cell phone companies were sort of saying, no, we're happy to have Starlink as competition. Are they, though? Would you be? Do you think so? They're a bit more expensive than you, but maybe not for long. Soon phone conversations on Starlink. I'm not entirely sure that they are that happy. The other thing I noticed over the last little while, first there was an Amabungani story about diesel. And it's one of those amazing headlines where it was diesel that was staining cars. So, if there was a little bit of a spill or a splash, which happens probably most of the time you go and get fuel, you don't really notice it. It sort of brushes off. Your paint on your car is incredibly scientifically designed and it sort of manages no problem. Not this stuff. It seemed to really be staining cars, and goodness knows what was going on in the engine. And I was reminded about that, the story in Business Live today, that SARS and NatJoints raided 23 facilities over the last little while. They've confiscated nearly 1 million litres of what they think is contaminated fuel. It's diesel, some of it, is actually 68% paraffin. Now, I think if you're driving a tractor, it may not matter that much. And if you want to use it for a lamp, it may not matter that much. But if you want to use it for a lamp, you're probably not putting it in the engine of your bakkie. You're probably quite keen on having diesel. And one of the strange things about this is that for years and years and years, I've always just put whatever the fuel attendant sort of pointed to. You go to a place, you go in. Why would there be a problem? It's one of those kind of certainties in life, Suddenly you're in a position where you think, well, actually, I need to start being a little bit more careful. The company that did this, I think it's called Alliance Fuel. There's billions of rand going in here. There are various installations. There's a massive installation that SARS raided. This is one of those important stories that's happening kind of in the background. It's a bit like the fight against illicit tobacco. It's happening in the background. You're not really paying much attention, but actually quite a lot is going on around it. And you do need to just keep your eyes on this, because one of these days, it could start to affect you. I would like to ask if you've had this problem adulterated fuel and what it did to your engine. 011 883 0702 021 446 0567 and of course voice notes on 072 702 1702. Plenty to say about youth unemployment and Youth Day, and I think youth unemployment's been one of the big sort of focal points of this Youth Day. The Deputy President Paul Mashatile, who I just wondered maybe has a new speechwriter or someone put some effort into it, because often you listen to a political speech on a public holiday and you're not that interested. But when he said, and I was watching it quite closely, when he said we need to treat youth unemployment as a sort of moral emergency, was the phrase I did set up and take notice. I thought that was a very interesting comment. I'll say a bit more about it and what that could mean, the implications of that as we go through the show together, you and I. Good to have you along this public holiday Monday.
The Money Show.
With Stephen Grootes, live on 92.7 and 106 FM. Streaming on the Prime Media Plus app.
And DStv channel 856.
Well, some interesting statements coming out of MultiChoice. And of course, they had some results out last week, but they've also said that while they're losing subscribers to their linear broadcasting TV products, they're gaining subscribers to their streaming services, so DStv Stream and Showmax. But there are now also suggestions that two major changes could be in the works. The one is to separate SuperSport from the rest of the products on offer, so I suppose you would call it entertainment and sport. And in Uganda, it's looking at offering weekly packages. You'd be able to buy basically a streaming service week by week. Jan Vermeulen is the editor at Mybroadband.co.za. Jan, good evening. I really appreciate the time on a public holiday. Firstly, it seemed to me that one of the reasons, perhaps the major reason, people kept their premium DStv subscriptions was for the sport. Is separating them really such a good idea?
Good evening, yes, and I hope you've had a meaningful Youth Day. It's something that was really inevitable, and so there's going to be someone smart at MultiChoice that has looked at their declining subscriber base, and there's going to be some kind of break-even point where it makes sense to unbundle the sports package, offer it for a little bit less, 100, 150 rand a month, whatever it might be, than your full DStv premium package, and then try to win back the customers the DStv premium customers who have cancelled over the years because the full bouquet just got too expensive for them. But what that break-even point is, only that smart person at MultiChoice is going to know.
Doesn't it sort of only work if you're streaming? So let's just sort of separate this conversation. Let's put sport to one side for a moment. Doesn't it really only work if your streaming service is better than all of the other streaming services? And there's so many of them now, and some of them are very, very good. I suppose the big monopoly is on South African content.
They've got a lot of strength in South African content on the entertainment side. And no, your streaming service doesn't have to be better than everyone else's. I'm going to get in some trouble for saying this, but Disney Plus is a good example where it still has a lot of catching up to do in terms of the actual quality of the platform in South Africa. We don't have the same Disney Plus platform as is available in, say, the United States or the UK. We've got a version of Disney Plus that was first launched and built in India called Hotstar. And so it's gotten better over time, but it's certainly not better than anything else on the market. It's not better than, Showmax, Netflix, and all that stuff, but it's good enough, and it's got that content dominance. Like if you want Marvel or Disney content, you have to get it there. And DStv sits with a very similar advantage. So besides the fact that it's kind of unmatched when it comes to live sports broadcasting, both in terms of the quality of that sports live stream, we've seen Netflix kind of come up and it's botched a few live streams, and now more recently it's got one right. But live streaming, especially something as high demand as sports, is difficult, and DStv has done that well over the last several years. And then, it's made a big push in terms of local content. But it's not alone there. The other big streamers have also thrown some money at local content across the continent, not just in South Africa. And so the one trump card in MultiChoice's hands, something that it can do that nobody else can do at this point, is sports.
There are other sort of suggestions. I mean, if you look at sport, I mean, other countries stream sporting events. They do, and Netflix has done this, I think it is. But it's sort of common in the States, particularly for boxing, to have a pay-per-view model. You literally pay a certain amount of money for the event. Now, SuperSport did something slightly similar, or they used the kind of idea for the last Rugby World Cup final, and that sort of came, as I understand it, with a kind of month after that, and you had to make sure you read the T's and C's quite carefully. But I would imagine that in our market there would be parts of our sporting market where you could absolutely do a pay-per-view.
Yes, and some people, some sports fans who only follow one sport, for example, will find value in something like that. But the reason that MultiChoice has kicked back against balkanizing its offering like this over the last few years is that it will end up being more expensive for the full offering, and you may end up losing. So instead of just getting the UFC final or a boxing showcase match, that all of a sudden, we'd get pay-per-view in South Africa. And, overseas, people pay up to $100 to watch a single fight. And in South Africa, you just get it with your SuperSport subscription. And so for the longest time, MultiChoice has kicked against having to do that. And, long may it continue. But with the onslaught that streaming presents and the declining viewership in a sort of all-encompassing DStv premium package, that might be the inevitable thing. But for now, they're able to resist it.
I mean, there are other ways to do it as well, and it can depend on the sport. Formula One, which has had amazing growth in the last, call it 10 years, but really the last sort of 6 or 7, they have their own app, and of course you can stream it onto your own app, and you can then put it onto your TV from there, and you can just subscribe to that. And I know plenty of people, I mean, I can't understand it myself, Jan, but they do. They're wonderful people, but they are doing that. And I mean, they don't use SuperSport at all. And if you're interested in just one sport, if rugby were ever to get its act together, probably won't because of its ownership structure in the countries. But still, that's an option for someone.
Yeah, and that is a huge point of contention, point of competition, rather, for MultiChoice. And as you say, I've got lots of friends who love Formula One. And this is a really attractive option for them because what these companies and leagues end up doing is they keep back a whole bunch of behind-the-scenes content. So you get the race on the big streaming platform or the broadcaster, but certain in-vehicle shots or other behind-the-scenes stuff. If you look at the English Premier League, they do very similar things where each team might have an app with a subscription option that offers certain unique content to subscribers, and so the Premier League is also a huge get for MultiChoice. It's one of the big draw cards there. Is it has the EPL, it has just about every other soccer league as well. It's got all the big rugby fixtures. It's got the F1, and so with the increasing competition from within the rights holders themselves, the people who sell DStv the rights. Can you imagine if the IPL decides, no, we're just going to launch directly into South Africa with our own app. We're not going to use DStv anymore. It's facing increasing competitive pressures there too, and we'll have to maneuver carefully in the next few years to ensure it does not squander its position of dominance that it enjoys now.
I mean, obviously different things happen in different countries. In Australia, I think it's called Stan, which is a sort of sports streaming service. Now, look, I can't imagine that the rights to Australian Rugby Union are very expensive because, Australia. But even so, someone here, I mean, I realize the relationship between SA rugby, cricket, and football as well, and DStv goes back many, many years. At some point, someone's going to come along and wave dollars in front of someone's face, and that whole relationship could change.
Yes, and that's the nature of the beast, really. And there's plenty of industries like this. It's not just broadcasting. Us in the media are facing exactly the same kind of constant disruption brought on by the digital age. And we all just have to roll with the punches. And it's going to be the same for MultiChoice to ensure that it is able to offer viewers something they can't get somewhere else.
The idea of having weekly packages, and this is DStv is starting this in Uganda, as I understand it. They'll see how it goes. I mean, basically, and it goes back to costs. So the idea would be that people, are finding it difficult to sort of pay for any kind of entertainment, any kind of satellite or streaming service. And so if you can go week by week, people can kind of manage that a little more easily. I must say, I had not heard of any other service offering a week by week option at all.
Yeah, it's a very interesting idea, especially in a market like Africa. MultiChoice's previous strategy, long-term strategy, kind of hinged on an African economic miracle, and it's increasingly looking like that economic miracle is not materializing. And we've got Africa has its own challenges, but there's a global issue right now, several global issues, in fact, that are putting a dampener on everybody's economies. And so the weekly option, it reminds me a little bit of what we see locally with our mobile network operators, where they also offer something, for fortnightly, weekly, daily data bundles, that sort of thing, to make it the cost, to offer a service at a cost that is more manageable for the consumer in that country. And this experiment seems to me very much in the same vein as that. They can see that the consumer is under pressure in a lot of its markets. So what can they do to meet that consumer where they are in life and offer them a product that they're able to afford and that gives them what they want?
There are a couple of sort of foundational things that I think maybe we can cling to, and let me put them to you, and you can tell me if I've got this right. I mean, the one is, I think Rupert Murdoch has said it, but many people have said it, content is king. If you have a deep library and access to a sort of deep library like DStv has, like Disney has, like Netflix has now, and that's essentially what they're spending all of their money on. And so that would be sort of fact one. Fact two would be that you make more money by selling it to more people, even if you charge them less, which should mean that more people have access to live sports, and we shouldn't get, I'm hoping, to the point where you charge something like $100 for one event.
Yeah, and I think you've summarized it exactly right. And so content is king, and DStv on the entertainment side has international content like HBO. They've got their local content that they're investing in and pushing hard while trying to contain costs there. They've got a huge position of sports dominance. Also, to add to your list of international players, Amazon, not to be discounted there, which has thrown its hat in the ring with regards to sports rights and bought MGM, which comes with a massive back catalogue, and are using MGM to produce new original content. And so another, huge competitor there with the deep pockets of Jeff Bezos behind it. And so, and then with regards to, you can make more money by charging more people less. And that's actually exactly what MultiChoice has been doing, even though people didn't want to hear it, they don't want to see it. In fact, got angry if I suggested that DStv Premium was competitively priced relative to what we're seeing overseas. But we're starting to see the impact of what happens when the subscriber base declines, is that eventually you stop making money, or you stop turning profit on the customers who remain, and then you have to make a plan.
Jan Vermeulen, really appreciate the time. Thank you. Editor at mybroadband.co.za. Well, on the subject of sport and how you watch it, one of the big live sporting events over the weekend, the World Cricket Test Championship. You might recall the Proteas won. They beat Australia, and therefore that makes us world champions. Stuart Hess is a cricket writer at The Times. Stuart, good evening to you. Test cricket's been under pressure. T20 makes more money more quickly, and yet I think many cricketers and older people like myself still see Test cricket as the kind of best overall format. Could a Test series, a Test competition like this, help to kind of rescue it in some way?
I think so. I think we've seen the impact of the World Test Championship in South Africa. We saw the interest that the two Test matches with Pakistan generated at the end of last year, with that Test match at Centurion, and then the 3 days of sold out crowds at Newlands afterwards, because there was the opportunity for the Proteas to qualify for the World Test Championship final. And so the interest for Test cricket is certainly there. And, having been at Lord's for 4 days, the fact that so many South Africans flew in. I mean, there are a lot of South Africans, obviously, that stay in London, that came to the game, but there were so many people that flew in from South Africa, which caught me by surprise. Caught some of us who were out here covering the game by surprise, how many there were. So the interest for Test cricket is still there as a concept. The World Test Championship is very good. There are certain elements about it that need to be refined and improved, but as a concept, as a means of raising interest in Test cricket, the World Test Championship has actually shown that it is doing its job really well.
I mean, the first idea of a sort of World Test Championship, I think it was a sort of the first time that you'd had more than two teams playing against each other in a sort of test event was, I think, 1912, when we got badly beaten by Australia and England. That didn't work. This format, it takes place over quite a long period of time. I understand the idea, but I almost didn't really know it was happening until suddenly Pakistan was, here, and it was on for us to qualify.
Yeah, no, the marketing of it has been absolutely poor, both in South Africa and by the ICC. And I guess because it's an ICC event, it needs to, you hold them responsible more. But also, it's a case of we're, as cricket watchers, so accustomed to seeing series between different countries. So, we get up, or the interest would peak for series involving England and Australia. Post-isolation, those series continue to hold interest. And then India came in and had some of the big superstars of the game during the 90s. You think of Sachin Tendulkar and Rahul Dravid. And interest in series involving India was enormous. I guess what's taken place with the World Test Championship is it's sort of been in the background. And cricket has this issue in that because it's got three formats, World Cups in the two white ball formats, T20 and 50 over cricket, kind of hold sway when you think about what the world events are in cricket. But I actually think, the way this match unfolded at Lord's the last 4 days, really has raised interest in Test cricket again, particularly for those nations that aren't, as what is called in the big three, India, Australia and England, the three wealthiest nations in cricket. And it will be interesting to see. I know the ICC is really backing the World Test Championship the next few cycles. Lord's is going to ghost the final, I think, for the next two finals of the World Test Championship. So, that helps to elevate interest even more. But it's going to come down to the marketing of it, certainly in South Africa. And what I've seen here, the marketing for the World Test Championship is only going to take off.
I mean, I understand the interest in T20s and to an extent one days. I get it. And I mean, I go to the T20s when I can. The kids have a great time. But with Test cricket, you keep the TV on all day. There's a lot of advertising money to be made. Surely, I mean, officers keep it on. Everyone keeps it on. I mean, people watch it on their phones next to the desk while they're, working. I mean, there are lots of ways to make money out of Test cricket. It's 5 days, for goodness sake. That's the point.
Oh, absolutely. I agree with you 100%. Like I said, I don't think it's been marketed particularly well at international level outside of those big three countries. And South Africa needs to take some responsibility for that, for what it does in South Africa as well. There's the difficulty, I guess, economically. South Africa's, you know this better than anyone, not the wealthiest nation in the world. I covered a test match in Durban last year with Sri Lanka, which was a crucial match in terms of, South Africa having to qualify for the World Test Championship, the final. They had to win that game. And that match took place in November, and there was barely anyone at Kingsmead for those 3 days that it took place. And it was at the time, and, I got into a bit of trouble for this with the KZN cricket authorities because I was pointing out, what are you guys doing? Why is there no one here? It's such an important game. And the CEO, Heinrich Strydom, was a good man, pointed out to me that we can give tickets away, but the schools can't come because everyone's writing exams.
Yeah.
You're coming down to the end of the year, businesses are trying to wrap things up. So there's a lot of extra work being put in. So people find it difficult to find, a couple of hours to come and spend maybe a session at a game. So South Africa, just economically, it's difficult. And yet, Stephen, when I attended the match at SuperSport Park, the first test with Pakistan, sold out on day 1, close to a sellout on day 2. That match wrapped up on day 3. At Newlands, the first 2 days were sold out. Day 3 was very close to a sellout, and day 4 the same. So the interest for Test cricket is there. It's a timing issue as much as anything else in South Africa.
Stuart Hess, really appreciate the time after what I'm sure has been a long and I think exciting week. A cricket writer for The Times, bringing the time on the Youth Day Money Show to just after 6:30.
Travel is more than just ticking off countries. It's about the people, the culture, the food, the moments. I'm Pippa Hudson, and on Wonder the World, I invite you to join me every week as we explore destinations both near and far, with the help of fellow adventurers who share their unique travel stories. Listen to my podcast wherever you get them.
The Money Show.
With Stephen Grootes, live on 92.7 and 106 FM. Streaming on the Prime Media Plus app.
And DStv channel 856.
Well, good to hear from you this Youth Day. 011 88 30702 and 0214460567. I wonder if you get the sense that people who are older than you and people who are younger than you look at money any differently from the way you do? Do they make different decisions? I think in some cases there is some evidence that that is in fact the case. And there's new research out today suggesting Generation Z, people aged between 18 and 30, so quite young people, I suppose, are quite keen to use cash. They prefer their personal brand over possessions. And they see themselves as hustlers. Bronwyn Williams, a good friend of this show, is trend translator and partner at Flux Trends. Bronwyn, you're allowed to smile and laugh at being called a friend. Good evening. I do have to just start with one of the numbers, and I just wanted to interrogate it a little bit, because it suggested that the research that you were involved in found that only 16.6% of people in this survey identified as unemployed. And the whole focus of today, in a way, has really been about how high youth unemployment is. I suppose I need to ask who you were asking and how you came to that number.
Yeah, so this survey was done by Student Village. Of course, Student Village is well known as being a youth research agency, and they do their primary research on university campuses. That does come with a little bit of a proviso there, that students aren't necessarily representative of the entire, youth cohort in the country, given that, of course, even being a student is already a privilege in this society. But that said, that figure should still be taken quite seriously, because students aren't necessarily more likely to be employed than non-students. In fact, many students choose not to be employed because they are studying and focusing on studying. So we find that 16% quite interesting. It also maps on to the recent comments that have been made, I think, by one of the Capitec leaders and by the likes of Gigi Alcock, who've spoken so much about the fact that our informal economy is hiding a lot, and that the formal employment figures that we use, the formal economic indicators that we use, where you talk about things like GDP or unemployment or whatever, are not necessarily the exact same thing as what we're looking at. Those numbers are proxies. They're not necessarily 100% representative of reality. And this number also backs in with our more qualitative study we did with Student Village last year, where we spoke to young people, and when we asked them directly, are you employed or not, we got very similar numbers to what Department of Statistics is putting out, like roughly 2/3 of them unemployed. But when you dig a bit further and say, do you have a source of income, almost all of them did, which snaps onto the only 16% not having an income. And in fact, that 16% when it comes to students who don't have an income are actually quite often the more spoiled and privileged ones, the ones that don't have to have an income to survive. And this is the reality of the economy in South Africa. The real economy, the taxed economy, the tracked economy, the told economy by fintechs and banks isn't quite the same thing as the lived reality of the economy of actual South Africans, almost all of whom are making a plan and making a way and finding a way to get income, whether that income is through a side hustle, through a small business, through underemployment or informal employment, or through lovers, mothers, brothers, and sisters, the so-called Ubuntu economy, which is also something that Student Village picked up on when we did this research, that there is money flowing through young people's hands, but it's not coming from the formal sector. And this opens up a lot of questions about how we measure our economy, the sorts of policies we're putting in place, and of course, it's a huge indictment on our formal economy that is not absorbing our young talent, who is nonetheless surviving in many cases, perhaps even doing better than previous generations. We can get into the savings rates that came through on this report too.
So, I mean, there's so much to it, and we could talk about it forever, and maybe we should, but we'll come back to it. You talk about savings rate, and there's been some research over, I mean, for people of my generation, possessions were king, you know. You wanted to get on the house ladder, you wanted to get maybe a car, you wanted to kind of get all of those things, furniture. I think furniture must still be a big thing. And now it doesn't seem to be nearly the same for younger people. I mean, something has clearly changed here.
Yeah. I think one of the things that used to be the case much more so than now is that savings and investment were much more closely correlated. They were often conflated terms, right? If you were saving, you were investing. It was a long-term proposition. That's not the case that young people are not saving today. Quite the opposite. We find that young people are saving much more proportionally, and even sometimes real terms, than older generations. We're talking around saving something like up to a third of their income in some cases, and over 1,000 rand a month, which is not insignificant in today's day and age. They are saving, but saving is not equivalent to investing with this cohort. Saving is a much shorter term proposition, and the sorts of things they're investing in are very different to the sorts of things previous generations were investing in. Part of this is accessibility. It's not really accessible to buy a house even if you're 40 years old, let alone like 24 years old in this economy. I mean, we all know the data of millennials, let alone Gen Z, when it comes to ownership rates there. And of course, long-term savings of things like retirement are not even on this cohort's radar. And again, that's not down to irresponsibility, but it's down to this insight that I've been talking about quite a lot around this report, that for a person sitting at the vantage point of being 18, being 24 years old in this country, the question you got to ask yourself is, if I've got 1,800 Rand a month to save, which was one of the numbers that came up, where do I put it to get the greatest return on my investment? Do I give it to a financial advisor? Do I invest it in the formal stock market? Or do I swing for the fences, bet it on cryptocurrencies or sports betting, something that will give me a high risk but high return chance to get ahead? Given, of course, that if I am going to invest it in an interest-bearing savings account with one of our wonderful financial advice companies here in South Africa, I'm going to get a very small return, or something like, if I'm lucky, maybe 10 or 12% a year, right? That's not going to make me rich. That's not going to get me the house. The other thing I can invest in, of course, if I'm not just going to play the financial nihilism game and go bet it all on red or their financial equivalents of it, they can choose to invest in themselves. And investing in themselves is what we are seeing most of them are doing. What do we mean by investing in themselves? That's saving for further education. That's saving for equipment to start or scale a small business. That's saving for even things like clothes and status items that can actually improve your personal brand and help you to land the job. There's been some very nasty papers that have come out around about the same time that our paper did, but from academic studies that show that even things like firemen, their future earnings potential is based on how hot they are the year they entered the fire force. Okay. So when it comes to investing in your personal branding, we live in a cynical consumer culture where bone smashing or stretching your legs or getting Botox or taking Ozempic is directly tied to how much money someone else is going to pay you in this very fickle society of ours. Suddenly investing in yourself is no longer a frivolous expense. It's actually an investment strategy. It also shows that young people, quite frankly, again, a question that came out of our qualitative study we did last year that's been validated now, are more optimistic about themselves. They believe in themselves more than they believe in our country. And that's what happens. This is the proof in the pudding, the sort of revealed preference. If I prefer to invest in myself rather than investing in an account that is tied to the JSE, that's a proxy for our country, that shows we're more optimistic about ourselves than we are about the economy that we find ourselves in. And with good cause.
Yeah, absolutely. Bronwyn Williams, so much more to get into. Thank you so much. Trend translator, partner at Flux Trends. More on Youth Day, unemployment, and some of the comments around it in about half an hour from now.
The Money Show with Stephen Grootes is brought to you by Absa Corporate and Investment Banking, proud sponsor of the Africa Energy Forum 2025.
Well, I was interested today by the way in which the Deputy President, Paul Mashatile, was talking about youth unemployment and saying it's a moral emergency. I thought that was interesting for a couple of reasons. One is that the ANC is known for some time unemployment is the big problem. But go back to sort of 2009, Jacob Zuma's first term as leader, the first time he was leading the ANC into an election, and they made that point then. Of course, it was also the throes of the great financial crisis, so to try and create jobs then was very, very tough. What I suppose we've never really seen is an election that's all about jobs. And I do wonder, when the Deputy President is making that comment, when he is a contender for the position of ANC leader, if maybe one day we'll get an election that is fought really on the issue of jobs rather than on some of the other things they've been fought about in the past, often very important things in the past. But I do wonder if at some point some politician will be able to make the issue about jobs.
702. Stephen is on The Money Show.
6 to 8 p.m.
You may remember a conversation last week around tariffs, and we were speaking to the International Trade Administration Commission Chief Commissioner. But I made the point that the cheapest Chinese electric car now costs around 150,000 Rand. It's the BYD Seagull. But it's not the only cheap electric car in China, and there's now a fierce price competition. Some companies that have made these cars seem to be losing money. Dr. Martin Davis is an expert both on China and the automotive industry. Martin, good evening. China has been promoting cheaper electric vehicles. There's been deliberate government policy around this. Why is there suddenly no demand for these cars?
Yeah, good evening, Stephen. Always good to chat to you. Well, this is yet another industrial wave of overcapacity coming out of China. And it's not just for China's economy, and China's consumers undoubtedly benefit, but China's industry goes through these waves of what I call sort of this Darwinian type competition, where literally the fittest survive. If you're looking at China, you'll be staggered to hear there's roughly about 80 odd Chinese EV brands already. I predict that probably in 5 years' time or so, if there's 10 or 15 left, I'll be surprised. Such as the intensity of competition. We saw this initially with steel, we've seen it with cement, more traditional industries. We see it with textile garments, we've seen it with consumer electronics. And now we see in the last 2, 3, 4 years is the significant overcapacity, intense competition in the Chinese automotive sector, particularly with EVs. And to conclude is that what we've always seen in the last 25 years or so, 30 years, is as Chinese domestic competition intensifies in consumer goods or traditional industries, excess capacity is always exported. And this begs the question is how do countries with existing automotive manufacturing facilities seek to counter this pending wave or influx of imports?
I mean, as I understand it, I read China's actually only using about half of its EV capacity right now. So, I mean, there's tons of the stuff that can still be produced. We haven't actually seen, I mean, if you were to export electric cars, even with tariffs and all the rest, and have them sell them in South Africa for around 200,000 Rand, you would probably, they would sell like hotcakes. I'm a bit surprised we haven't seen them here. Are we going to see them around the world?
Undoubtedly. I mean, it depends largely. I mean, as you know, Stephen, I'm living in the Middle East these days, and 2 years ago, we hardly saw any Chinese vehicles at all. Nowadays, Chinese vehicles are competing with the likes of Hyundai, Kia, and increasingly Nissan, Toyota. So they're the new Japanese, they're the new Koreans on steroids, effectively. And as I said, we have a number of brands being exported. I was last week in Abu Dhabi, and walking around the shopping mall there, and there was a display of, you guessed it, Chinese auto vehicles in one of the big sort of, communal areas in a shopping mall. And, I have a keen interest, as you know, in cars, and I saw a couple of these Chinese brands I've never even heard of before. And I was like, where do these cars come from? And not in terms of China, but which city in China do they come from? And they all look pretty much the same. They're fantastic design, all of which are EV powered, and batteries the great equalizer. Before, the massive investment went into internal combustion engine technology, of course. Nowadays, it's an off-the-shelf battery put into a vehicle, and the cost of entry, the development cost of entry, the R&D necessary to go into the automotive space, the barriers to entry have been reduced significantly. And there's been a large number of levers the Chinese government has pulled to incentivize EVs, electric vehicle combustion, or EVs to replace combustion engines in China, because the Chinese always understood that if you go back to 1980s, 83, VW Group was the first multinational to go into China. They built up a market share of over 40% of the total automotive market. Now it's down to roughly 14%. It peaked in 2013 or so. So the last decade and a half, roughly VW has lost almost 30% of market share. But the point being, of all these companies, OEMs, German, Japanese, French, British, whatever they may be going into China, all of whom were forced into JV partnerships. The JV partnerships sucked out all the intellectual property from and replicated the supply value chains in China. But the big differentiator was always the combustion engine. Now that batteries, and Mr. Weber, China's have been pushing, China's government really incentivized EVs, incentivized battery production, knowing full well to replace the internal combustion engine gave themselves a significant domestic and now global competitive advantage on EVs, not on combustion engines. And that's what's driving China's success.
Sure. Fascinating. Thank you very much indeed, Dr. Martin Davis, on the line there, expert in China and in the automotive industry. Okay, so you can see how technological change is allowing China to do this. The question, of course, is, are we going to see some of those cars here? You would think that economics, the iron law of it, would eventually work. You're with The Money Show at 7 o'clock.
And now, The Money Show
with Stephen Grootes on 702.
Let's walk the talk.
The Money Show with Stephen Grootes is brought to you by ABSA CIB, powering Africa's potential from ground to grid. Proud sponsor of the Africa Energy Forum 2025. Good evening. Welcome to the second hour of the Youth Day edition of The Money Show. We'll find out a little bit more, and of course it's the big international story at the moment. There's the conflict between Israel and Iran underway in the Middle East. All sorts of impacts, looking at oil impacts to oil production and transportation. And of course, the Strait of Hormuz, which is the big thing that I think people are watching. We'll speak to Timothy Walker about that in just a moment. Focus again on Youth Day. So many conversations to have around it. I do wonder if we're going to see a slight change in tone from government on this. And then looking forward to speaking to Kgothatso Motjane, the wheelchair tennis champion. She's been winning Grand Slam titles, but also just her journey with tennis. Really looking forward to that conversation. And also if she's got some plans to maybe go into the administration of tennis. It's a game she's been playing for so much of her life. I do wonder if she sort of sees a future in it. Also announced as one of the people on the sort of to lead the national dialogue. So it just shows you where sport can take you. Good to hear from you this evening. 011 883 0702 021 446 0567. Voice notes, of course, on 072 702 1702.
702. Stephen is on The Money Show.
6 to 8 p.m.
Well, in the Middle East tonight, Israel and Iran continue to fire missiles and drones at each other. That's pushing the price of oil up over the last few days. Come down a little bit now, but markets, of course, concerned about any intensification, and particularly around the Strait of Hormuz. It's a small piece of sea through which a large percentage of the world's oil supplies flow. Timothy Walker is Maritime Senior Researcher at the Institute for Security Studies. Timothy, good evening. I really appreciate the time on a public holiday. Iran has several proxy groups in that region. It's now under attack from Israel. I presume if it chose, it could ask those proxy groups to close that piece of sea again.
Good evening, Stephen. Good evening to everyone listening tonight. Iran has made use of proxies to a big deal. It has obviously used the Houthi to a great extent, or has been sponsoring the Houthi to a great extent in the Red Sea. The Strait of Hormuz is a little too far away for the main proxy groups that Iran's been involved in over the last few decades, Hezbollah and Hamas in particular being the two notable ones. So it would be a little bit of a stretch for the Houthi to be involved in effectively trying to close two straits. It'd be very interesting to track, though, what use is made or the growing presence of things like drones, and in particular, mines. I think one of the big problems we have to worry about coming up is that even if there isn't a direct presence of navies or of visible signs, that there may be an increasing number of mines being laid in the Strait of Hormuz, because that's where a big problem is going to emerge.
And I mean, a country could say they've done it. They could even plant fake mines and it has the same effect. Someone has to go and see what's going on there, and that takes time and money.
It does, yes, and you'll be under sort of the threat of missile attack of now we're seeing unmanned or uncrewed surface and even subsurface vessels and drones being used as well. So the threat environment for military involved in that area would be quite high. For shipping going through the area at the moment, I've mentioned there's that risk of hitting a mine, and an oil spill obviously would be tremendously environmentally destructive. But shipping is, for the time being, remaining steady. There's obviously some signs and some signalling that extra precautions are going to be taken. But for the time being, what we're tracking, as you mentioned just now, is oil prices surged slightly, but have gone down to a slightly lower level. They still haven't reached the levels that we saw earlier this year and even a few years ago. So we're quite low at that rate as well. So there's a general sense, I would say, that the measures that could be taken, the activation of proxies, the seizure of vessels by Iran, that's another particular matter which could be a problem. But the halting of shipping is seen as unlikely for the time being.
So it's been interesting that one of the big things Iran could do, if it chose, and this would be a strategic choice and a very important one, is how it handles the US. Handling the US has got a little more complicated in the last few months. But if they were to take some action against a US ship, or if they were to close the strait, or just even get one of their proxies to lay mines across it, the US could choose to see that as an attack on their interests, and there would be consequences. And could that be a factor that would prevent Iran from basically taking this to the sea?
Absolutely. And it wouldn't be just the US as well. The Persian Gulf, I mean, when we talk about choke points of the world where shipping or anything can be disrupted, the Strait of Hormuz really is kind of the choke point. So it wouldn't be just affecting people, the US, for instance, with an interest in oil and freedom of navigation, but it would affect Saudi Arabia and Iraq and Kuwait and UAE. And these countries don't really have an alternative to get their oil out. So they are also then looking at tremendous economic and social disruption as well. Not to mention, well, I'm going to mention it, but to bring in other countries like India and China, a closure of the Straits of Hormuz is almost like a last resort. It's always been threatened, and there's always been disruptions. And Iran, in a way, many countries around the world do this. They always try and push the threshold to see what is the kind of response countries will do. A closure is the last resort. And if, for instance, a country like China or India, which is reliant to a huge extent, not just on the oil, but on the gas, for instance, from Qatar, if that were to be disrupted, then they would probably have to then also, in effect, potentially join the United States in saying that the freedom of navigation through the strait is a fundamental strategic concern for them, for the whole world, and to ask, in effect, parts of the world to take a sacrifice or take the strain by higher oil prices or no oil at all is not something I think any country is really willing to actually broach.
Okay, so I mean, there's a lot going on here. Then the other options, obviously, at some point, if this intensifies, if something happens, is if tankers, oil tankers, gas tankers, I think it's gas tankers, would have to come around South Africa. What does that do to the global shipping industry? I mean, obviously it lengthens things. Each consignment takes a lot longer. Would there be a shortage of stock, of space, for example?
Well, I think at the moment the market is gradually looking at an increase in costs or in the amount that can be charged. So there's a sense that these disruptions will exist for a while. So they're likely to be increased numbers of ships or the large number of vessels which we are seeing coming around the Cape, continuing for at least a time for a little bit longer. That there's container vessels which are always going to be continuing to come around the Cape for the time being because it's still too dangerous for most container vessels, which are the highest value, to go through the Bab el-Mandeb and onto Suez. What has been a lifeline in particular for a country like Egypt over the last few years, or since the Houthi have started disrupting shipping, is that the Suez Canal is not being completely closed off because lots of crude oil tankers, lots of natural resource carrying vessels have been going through, so they've been able to get revenue, a huge amount less revenue. Now, if oil tankers are stuck in the Persian Gulf and can't get out, there's only one or two pipelines that cross, for instance, to the other side of Saudi Arabia, to Jeddah, where there could be some oil going out, and that could go through the Suez. But then you're looking at tremendous revenue losses for Egypt. You're looking at even further disruptions, because if the Bab el-Mandeb then is closed because perhaps, as we mentioned just now, the Houthi have more of an affinity with Iran, so are looking to potentially join in if there's a wider conflict, then again the whole world is looking at major shipping disruptions. So it looks like there'll be more ships coming around the Cape for the time being, and we're looking at potentially huge disruptions which could affect a country like Egypt in a massive way as well.
So it really does matter what happens between Iran and Israel. And has Israel's attacks on Iran completely changed the way everybody is seeing this? Because already, as you point out, cargo ships are already coming around the Cape rather than chance it. Does what happened last week completely change the game, or does it just intensify a dynamic we're already seeing?
Oh, well, the dynamic is escalating all the time. We have to see how far both sides are willing to escalate. As I say, the last resort, as it were, for Iran to kind of make this a massive international issue is the closure of the Straits of Hormuz. For Israel, if it were to start targeting Iran's domestic oil capacity, it hasn't yet done that. It's been targeting the nuclear facilities it fears the creation of a nuclear bomb by Iran. If it were to target those oil facilities, which would massively then disrupt Iran's oil export capability, that would change the dynamic, I think, in a big way, because people would then be able to, well, the narrative could be increasingly that this is becoming a global matter because Israel is forcing that closure. So long as I think it doesn't target the domestic oil infrastructure in Iran, what it's doing is it's pushing this narrative of two Iranians who are not happy with the Iranian regime, or haven't been for a long time, that there's a potential for, they're calling it regime change, I see. And that could be the big game changer in that regard. And what I'm seeing already tonight, a few sources, although it's still not completely verified, is that Iran is sending signals out to various embassies and intermediaries to start negotiations as well. So it does seem a little bit like Iran is looking to be the one to compromise at the moment.
Sure. Timothy Walker, thank you very much indeed. Really appreciate the time. Maritime Senior Researcher at the Institute for Security Studies. Clearly the sort of big international story to watch in terms of markets and the economy at the moment. That situation, very, very scary. And I mean, when you start to see reports of citizens leaving, or civilians leaving Tehran because they're worried about what Israel is going to do, Israel sort of issuing what they call evacuation orders. I mean, you can't tell people in another country to evacuate, but we kind of know what's coming next. It does tell you how scary this entire situation is. And the Middle East, I suppose, has been like this for quite some time.
702.
702.
Stephen is on X.
At Stephen Grootes.
Well, good to hear from you tonight. Well, I'm sure you might have heard in the EWN bulletins, the Deputy President, Paul Mashatile, speaking at the National Government Youth Day commemoration, he was in Tlokwe, Potchefstroom, saying that our levels of youth unemployment are, and he used the phrase, a moral emergency. Sharmi Surianarain is the Chief Impact Officer at the Harambee Youth Employment Accelerator. Sharmi, good evening. Good to talk to you again. I presume you agree with Mashatile. It's a moral emergency?
Thank you, Stephen. It's great to be back. Absolutely. And the Deputy President was actually at our offices last Friday, and I think he has articulated quite well. It is a moral emergency. And also to use another phrase, we've accepted this abnormality of the crisis of youth unemployment being so high. It is absolutely unacceptable. And we need concerted action. And today's Youth Day, we need to be in service of the many youth that are coming into the labour market but are kept out. And that's what Harambee is about.
Do you get a sense, I mean, it's interesting, something seems to be changing with the tone of government on this. Do you get a sense that anything is different this year from the, Sharmi, thousands of conversations we've had about this in the last 5 or 6 years?
Look, I have a little bit of hope. Look, it is a bit bleak, and I have to admit, this is something that has kept us up at night, me up at night personally, for several years. But I do think there's something that's shifting at this current moment. And I'll give you maybe the context first. Yes, we are at 56% youth unemployment of young people aged 18 to 34. The numbers are bleak. And if you look at the past 15 years, even though we've had GDP growth, albeit small, it hasn't favored young people. And this is despite many scaling and successful organizations like Harambee, like YES, like the NYDA. What's different this year, and perhaps this is partly in partnership because of the National Pathway Management Network, SA Youth, the Presidential Youth Employment Initiative, we are trying to effectively call this moral emergency to concerted, coordinated action. We've drafted a national vision towards reducing unemployment in the next 6 years to by 2030, bringing it down to not the very acceptable, but at least to something that we can work with, about 35%. So reducing it by 10 to 20 percentage points is the goal. And the reason I think I have faith in this, it's based on evidence, it's based on impact, and it is based on a scaling, coordinated set of actions across not just Harambee, not just Yes, but the entire country to help get young people into work and grow jobs for youth.
I don't know if this is a complicating factor or if we need to, or how seriously we need to take it, but there is some research, and you would have seen the debate last week sparked by Gerrie Fourie from Capitec about the definition of unemployed. We spoke to Bronwyn Williams, someone who I know not to argue with, and she was suggesting, she's from Flux Trends, she was suggesting that their survey, she did make the point, it was sort of among students and more privileged people, but only 16% of the people they spoke to between 18 and 30 say they're unemployed. I mean, that number was a surprise to me. We seem to now be having an argument around definitions. Now, that can be useful if it helps us focus on the program, or focus on the problem, rather. I don't know if it is.
Right. Absolutely. So I think there's two factors at play here. Firstly, we need to count all work. That said, just counting informal work alone is not going to solve our jobs crisis. Our informal economy in South Africa is incredibly stunted. I mean, this has been documented time and time again. We've had a TIPS paper published today. Professor Haroon Borat talks about the sort of stunting of South Africa's informal economy. Typically, countries of our GDP employ 45% in the formal sector, 45% in the informal sector, and the rest are unemployed. Ours skews incredibly formal and incredibly unemployed. We have about 50% employed in the formal sector, about 18% in the informal sector, and the rest unemployed. So yes, and I think both of those things are true. We have a stunted informal economy. There is work being done in the informal economy, and we can do more to count it. But it's not just that that's going to fix our jobs crisis. We absolutely need to de-risk the informal economy. Currently, I mean, Harambee's own research, for example, shows that young people, if they work in the hustle economy, earn as little as 700 Rand. And that's not tenable by any means. So we need to both count the work. Yes, it matters to getting an inroad into the economy. But we have a formality bias as South Africa. So we need to cut red tape. We need to make it easier for young people to start and run businesses. We need to actually have it be a viable pathway for youth to be able to create and grow businesses. So all of that needs to happen. So in a way, I think the article that was written last week was a bit misleading. We're not going to solve our jobs crisis just by counting informal work, even though informal work does need to expand.
We have endless debates around youth unemployment and unemployment generally. We talk about this intervention and that intervention. If we were simply to make sure the electricity always worked, that there was, I don't quite like the phrase law and order because it was, sort of the apartheid phrase rather than safety and security, and now it's police again. But if there was the rule of law, let me put it like that, so reduce crime and a big reduction in violent crime. If there were no potholes, if we just got the basics of a society right, how big a difference would that make? I would like to think it would be a lot more enabling.
It would be huge, Stephen. I mean, that's spot on. And I think those are the three priorities of the Business Unity South Africa partnership. So fix crime and corruption, sort out logistics and transport, and energy. The three priorities are spot on and are critical to enable growth. However, I think the reason we think unemployment, particularly youth unemployment, requires a specific targeted focus is that our research shows over the past 15 years is even if you fix growth alone is not going to solve our youth unemployment challenge because young people have been left out. And there's a variety of reasons for this. This could be hiring biases and demand-led skilling, etc. And it's unfortunately a worldwide trend. It's not just South Africa that's facing this. We just have an disproportionate bent towards it because we've had such a historic legacy of exclusion. So we're seeing the numbers that are, dwarfing everything else. So for us, we have to fix those. We have to fix the potholes. We have to fix crime and corruption and logistics and the energy crisis. However, we have to actively include youth. The number of young people that are not in employment, education, and training is 9 million in South Africa. Now, that number is the size of the country of Austria. We, through the public employment program, through Harambee, through Yes, we've stemmed a tide. We've stopped a hemorrhage of young people that could be a social cohesion issue if they weren't getting work otherwise. But we have not reversed the tide. So for us now to call this a moral emergency requires not just, yes, Harambee, NYDA, and the many great partnerships, the public employment program through the presidential employment stimulus, which has so many thousands of young people serving as teaching assistants in schools across the country. But we need coordinated action. We need to scale these initiatives. We need to double down on these initiatives. We need to coordinate across all employers to not just take a bet on young people, but to invest in them, because actually we could have a serious crisis on our hands if we don't.
Yeah. And I mean, as anyone who drives around and goes past hardware stores can see the crisis right there. If that's all you see, you know exactly what we're talking about, people who are desperate for some kind of income. I was making the point a little earlier that we've never really had an election dominated by the jobs issue. It's been the sort of apex priority of the ANC in the past, and I think other parties, and they mention it from time to time. I'm always a little surprised no one's been able to make jobs the big political issue that it so obviously is.
I mean, you're right. I think jobs is a tricky one because unfortunately the jobs promise ends up being something that's scrutinized and needs to be delivered. And it's tricky to make one, especially in the absence of growth and such macroeconomic and political uncertainty. And I mean, one thing we can say for sure, jobs is a political issue, but it's also an apolitical issue. It should actually affect us all. So it's not just the political cycle. Yes, it's a really important sort of election sort of promise, but this is something that has to affect us all on a daily basis. And it doesn't matter what political party is in power. This is something that Harambee, for example, and SA Youth were very clear. It has to be a national promise and a national covenant rather than something that's a political issue. It is important for the country that we all get young people into work. And the last thing I'll say is, I mean, some of this is also definitional. We are not going to have enough jobs for young people in the country. We are going to have public employment soak up the young people who can't get jobs. We're going to have the informal economy take on more and more youth. So this ends up becoming a sort of slippery thing for people to campaign on, for example, because you can't just promise 200,000 jobs, not deliver them, and then you get reelected. So the nuance is everything. And I think this is the reason why it has to be an apolitical and a nationwide issue. And I think the concept of a moral emergency makes sense in this context.
Sharmi, thanks very much indeed. Really appreciate it. Sharmi Surianarain is the Chief Impact Officer at the Harambee Youth Employment Accelerator. All right, so there does seem to be some sort of change in the tone, in the sort of context, in the understanding of the debate around how to create jobs. Interesting to see what Gerrie Fourie started, though, hey? Just to see so many conversations about it. I've seen, different professors saying very different things, and that's just in academia, never mind all of the other arguments that we've seen. In a moment, Grootes will talk to you about her career, the famous wheelchair tennis star, and how she's been able to do it. First, though, it's gone 7:30.
The Money Show
with Stephen Grootes, live on 92.7 and 106 FM, streaming on the Prime Media Plus app
and DStv channel 856.
Well, I'm pleased to tell you this evening that to talk about their career, we've got someone who's really become a real South African hero. Grootes, who's represented South African wheelchair tennis for many years and, of course, has won a doubles championship at Wimbledon. Grootes, good evening. Happy Youth Day, and I'm so glad you agreed to spend some time on your public holiday with us.
Good evening to you, and good evening to the listeners.
You were born, and let's sort of start at the beginning. You were born in Sesego in Polokwane, and you knew pretty early on that your life would probably be different to the lives of many other people. But when did you suddenly come across tennis as a sport? And I kind of have to ask this question. Did you see it in real life, or did you see it on TV first?
Well, I never saw it anywhere until actually I picked up a racket. So never had an opportunity to see it on a TV. I obviously grew up without a TV. And as for seeing it in person, never saw it before. Until they invited my school to come and try it out. I think by then they were introducing wheelchair tennis in the country. So only to find out actually there was an able-bodied tennis that actually existed, So yeah, it just caught me by surprise. For me, obviously, I just thought I was learning a new sport, and that's how it all began.
How old were you when you first realized that there was this game called tennis and that you could play it?
I mean, when I was introduced to it, I was 19 years old. I was in matric, so... Yeah, and also I wasn't so keen because, when you're in matric, you just feel like your plate is full. So I just thought when I go to varsity the following year, I don't have to, do this. But because I was playing sport already, I just thought when I get to university, I will just pick up other sport for fun, as a hobby. But wheelchair tennis was actually the only active sport for people with disabilities. So I felt like I didn't have so much choice, but just to join it as a hobby. So, yeah.
So you started as a hobby. You must have been, 19? You just started when you were 19. You're now, studying, so a little bit older. Was there a particular vibe? Was there a particular something? Or was it just a determination to do something active and this is all there was?
Yeah, I went to a special school for people with disabilities, and what they encourage us the most is to stay active all the time. So that's why they encourage us to play sport all the time, because also it was just another way for us to improve our disability, because we would be more mobile and be more independent, So they used sport as a tool to actually help us stay active. So that's why I wanted to take it up even when I got to university, even though it was a hobby. So I just found myself, deep into it, even after completing my studies, when they say I can try it full time. But when I started reading about the sport, and when I went to Australian Open for the first time in 2013, and people were making a big fuss about Roger Federer, Serena Williams, I was so curious, who are these people? And after that time, I read up about them. I was like, geez, this thing, it seems so serious. I need to start, taking it serious. And that's when I started reading more about the sport and getting a better understanding of actually what is it that I'm doing.
So was there a moment when you realized this was no longer a hobby? I mean, I presume it was before you went to the Australian Open. But was there a particular moment or an incident, or did you win a game or a tournament or something where you thought, oh, actually, I need to take this very seriously?
Actually, that moment was at the Australian Open. I thought I was attending just any other tournament. I mean, I was winning a lot of futures tournaments, and, even when they sent us overseas to play, we still played like in lower level tournaments that we would win. So we thought that was just a competition. But honestly, going to the Australian Open for the first time, that's why I actually realized that this is not just any game, this is a real deal, there's some seriousness to this game. And 2013, I think that's when I actually started making sure that I also educate myself about the sport and understanding actually what is it that I'm doing.
Often in the history of tennis players, so in most cases they're different to you. They start when they're quite young. I mean, if you look, there's a great movie about the Williams sisters, and how important their father was. Was there an important coach or someone who kind of helped you along, or someone who had a big impact along the way? Was there a relationship with someone maybe who sort of encouraged you, someone who was, a big part of it?
How we started also evolving in a sport. Excuse me. We were in a group setup type of a thing. It was just a group of us. That's how they were teaching us. Even when they were sending us to tournament, they were doing that. So Wheelchair Tennis South Africa, back in the days, they had a program whereby they will recruit different players and they will put us in a group setting, because we got to a point whereby they found us a training base at the University of Johannesburg. And we used to work with one coach. So it was almost like a team sport, but it's an individual sport at the end of the day. We will play with each other. So wheelchair tennis back in the days is the one that actually made sure that they teach us the sport. They equip us with the right skills, and also coaching back in the days. Until just along the way where, the federation has its own issues, and that's where we started facing all this, or the game as individuals, each to themselves, facing the challenges by yourself, trying to navigate the sports by yourself. But it started as a group settings, where they were teaching us like we were a team.
Were all the people who are playing with you in that group, are they still playing now? Do you still keep in touch with them?
Unfortunately,
Not.
due to the challenges that we faced along the way. Tennis is a very expensive sport. So not all of us we managed to get the sponsors along the way. So some of the guys, they didn't have much choice but to choose different paths because of how difficult it was financially.
So I can understand, and I've seen tennis players with a racket in their hand, and the racket and the type of racket that they use is incredibly important to them. And I imagine it is to you too. But you also have another piece of equipment, which is the wheelchair. And I wanted to ask how important it is. I mean, do you use the same one all the time? How important is that to your performance?
Yeah, I mean, the wheelchair, it's even more important because it's customized to you. You can't just use any wheelchair. It must be a wheelchair that was measured. It was made according to how you sit, how you feel balanced and all that. So it's really quite important that when you get a wheelchair, it be something that it's really made for your own comfortability, and I mean, a wheelchair lasts too close to, it depends. If the airline doesn't break it, or if you are not gaining weight to break it, it can actually last, good 7-8 years. But due to technology changing, so you try to actually play with the best that you could, because the weight is getting lighter. Part of it now is carbon fiber, so it's no longer just aluminium. So you have to look at the market, what is it that it's doing, if those kind of things are changing, because the equipment is becoming a huge part of the game. You want a chair that is lighter, that's going to help you move faster and turn quicker. So, but everyone's chair is different. It's made according to how they sit and they feel comfortable. Yeah,
they can't be cheap. I mean, they must cost a lot. They must cost the same as 10 rackets.
Yeah. I mean, like a wheelchair that I'm using at the moment, which we got it from the UK. We actually bought it for £7,000.
Sure.
In the UK, in the UK. So
that's a lot. Yeah. I can't even do the maths. Yeah.
We're not even counting the imports cost, the customs clearance cost. We're not even counting that. The chair on its own, it costs like £7,000. And I mean, rackets, just lucky to be sponsored by Dunlop, also the racket's expensive. I mean, one racket, goes around 4,000 rand going up. So, equipment is quite expensive, mostly when you love to play with the top of the toppest range equipment.
Yeah, no, of course. I feel I must ask you, you told us you were studying at university, you've had this amazing career and you're still going. And I mean, you're the first person I've ever spoken to who played in a final, never mind won it at Wimbledon. I've never spoken to someone who's done that before. Have you had to be working sort of full-time to make all of this work at the same time, or have you been able to only concentrate on the tennis?
I've just been a tennis player, actually, pretty much since I left university in 2010. So, I've never worked my entire life, so tennis has always been my life. That's why even when I was faced with challenges along the way, I was so adamant to make it work for me, because I realized that I invested so many of my youth years in it to really quit because of challenges. When wheelchair tennis lost its huge sponsorship in 2017, when we started looking for our own sponsorship, I felt like it was important for me to really, raise my hands and be like, I need help just to make it work, because I realized that all my youth years has been part of this, and I cannot give up now. And it's not even a lot of us who are actually, doing this thing or playing even tennis at the highest level in the country. So, I just sort of took it as a responsibility, but for myself. But it's quite a huge task what I did, because even today it's not it's not easy.
No, I'm sure. People in Sheshego, when you told your parents, told your family, I'm going to leave university, I'm going to play tennis. How did they react to that? Because I think a lot of people will see, especially a sport that they don't know very well, and think, I don't know if that's such a good idea.
Yeah, I mean, I think when I put it to my mom back in the days, obviously, I was convinced also to, try it out, that if you try it out, you have a potential, your life can change, and those are the things that I relate to my late mom back in the days that, they say if I come and play tennis, this is how my life might change.
Yeah.
But because my mom knew that I loved sport, she was just like, if it's something that will make you happy, go and try it and see if it will work out for you. But obviously the expectation was like, you just graduated, now is the time you go out and look for a job like anyone else. So, but she came to an understanding that I loved sports, so she wanted to give me that opportunity to really do something that will make me happy.
We're speaking to Khothatso Monjane this evening, telling you about her career and her journey through the world of wheelchair tennis. You're with The Money Show. It's 10 minutes to 8.
The Money Show with Stephen Grootes is brought to you by Absa Corporate and Investment Banking, proud sponsor of the Africa Energy Forum 2025.
We're speaking to Khothatso Monjane this evening, her career through the world of wheelchair tennis. It's 8 minutes now to 8 o'clock. Khothatso, I would like to ask, if I may, and I'm not going to push you on any of this. You're one of the people who's going to be leading you're going to be helping to lead the national dialogue. And I don't know how the presidency, I presume it was the presidency, got in touch with you. Maybe they got in touch with you directly or your people, but quite an honor to get that phone call, I would think.
Yeah, definitely. It was such an honor when I got that call from the office of the presidency, So, yeah, I mean, they called me directly from the office of the presidency. So it's indeed an honor. And I normally say, I feel like I'm an ordinary person as much as people feel like you've done so much, that classify you as a certain type of a person. But I'm like, I actually am an ordinary citizen who live on the ground, who sees the challenges that the others faces every day. And I personally, some of those challenges, I live with, considering I'm a person with disability, and I feel like there's a lot that can still be done for people living with disabilities. So it was such an honor that I will form part of the group that will, contribute positively to bring change to this beautiful country, because I think, we are at the point whereby we really need that particular change, and most importantly, yes, we need to hear from the people what's really needed.
I mean, I felt for you and for many others on the panel that you've never been asked political questions, and now suddenly everyone can ask you political questions, which I would find quite difficult if I were you. But but are there particular issues you think you want to bring up in that process? I mean, obviously your lived experience, as you say, must be part of that. Are there other things you think are important?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many important issues to be addressed. Obviously, as a citizen of this country, the issue of crime, the issue of unemployment, corruption. There's so many things. There's so many things that really need to be, brought to account and make sure that they're really being dealt with. We are faced with so many challenges in this country, and I think it's about time we tackle that and see what solution can come up. And it's good to hear from the people, because sometimes they're the ones who can bring better solutions as they live with these challenges on their daily lives.
You spoke earlier about how important in the early days, the fact that there were people at Tennis South Africa who were helping you, there was a team of people, etc., and then how important it was also the loss of the sponsorship and how, all of that had a big impact on you. Would you at some point maybe like to get involved in the administration of tennis, or even just sport generally? the chair. You laugh. The chair of the International Olympic Committee used to swim.
Yeah, look, I want to be the Minister of Sport.
Oh, wow. Better not tell Gayton.
Well, yeah, of course. I mean, I feel like I've been playing sport at the highest level, traveled, and I've seen how other countries are doing stuff. I talk to people when I'm out there. I'm not just out, playing tennis. I would like to also understand how their programs run, So, yeah, I mean, getting into leadership is something that, in future I would definitely consider. And I think being part of this eminent group person is an opportunity to really explore some of my leadership skills, and to also learn a lot, because I'm sure there will be a lot of leaders in this particular thing. So definitely in future, as much as my dream seems impossible of being a minister, but sure, one day I would love to be part of leadership in sport.
Well, I mean, anything can happen. Kgotatso, there will be people who are listening to you now, and they will be thinking of that moment when you said to your family, to your mom, I want to do this professionally. And they will be thinking they have children who might be good at something. And I think that's a hard decision to make for lots of reasons. Your mom said something very good, which is, if you enjoy it, then you must do it. And it can be a very difficult life as a sports person. I mean, you spoke about the airlines, and, I can't imagine that that's always very easy. What's your advice for that parent of a young person when the young person comes to them and says, I want to do this tennis, rugby, football, whatever it is. I want to do this professionally. How should they approach it?
I think in this day and time, it's actually good to look at the risks that come with that particular thing that you would love to pursue. Because honestly, the world is changing. The markets are different. I mean, now when we talk about sponsorship these days, I mean, influencers get sponsored more than athletes themselves. So you really need to take all those things into consideration before you make that particular decision to be like, I want to be a rugby player now, I want to be, but also when you are talented and you really believe in that particular talent and you believe you can take it up with its challenges, you should also give it a try. But I would like to think in this day, you really have to look into it thoroughly and make sure that you understand the challenges that will come with the risks that will be taking. Because also we live in a country where unemployment is quite high, and succeeding in something might take longer than you think or you anticipate. So it's just to judge it, thoroughly before you come to that decision. Or if you take it, at least have a backup that if it doesn't work, at least this is what I will be doing. Yeah.
Kgotatso, I've really enjoyed the last half an hour. Thank you so much for talking to us on Youth Day.
Thank you so much for having me.
Kgotatso Monjani, the wheelchair tennis player who's done such amazing things on the court and for South Africa, and I suspect there's so much more to come from her.
The Money Show with Stephen Grootes is brought to you by Absa Corporate and Investment Banking, proud sponsor of the Africa Energy Forum 2025.
Well, my suspicion is that the next few days are going to be dominated really by the Iran-Israeli conflict and how all of that is managed, what that does to the oil price, etc. I wouldn't be surprised, though, if there's some more developments coming out of the White House in the next couple of days, but there'll be a lot for us to talk about this time tomorrow. We'll see you then. Good evening. It's 8 o'clock.